That's just this. You remember we're here talking about the media use diary, and as I said, the first step, which I hope everyone is now certainly embarked upon, is to record your media use over 3 days. And so this is just a suggestion as to how to organize your data. Remember, what you finally will turn in will not even be this. This would be just fill it out as you're doing your study of your media use drill. We're talking about our first assignment due February 1st. So this, you're eventually going to write a short essay based on the data that you get here, but this is not the work. This is just gathering information about how you use media in an organized and detailed enough way to be meaningful. And remember, I was suggesting one weekend day where you're doing things, on a different schedule than your weekday in terms of media use. And then there's the famous give it up for one day or part of one day where you're giving up your favorite thing for a period of time. And so I'm just asking you, what was it? How long did you use it for? Any comments, things you were thinking about while you were doing it? And then when it comes time to write this up, what you're really looking for are, surprises or clarifications for yourself. Or, certainly when you give up something, that would be quite rare and not the usual thing you do. So maybe a large part of this 2-page essay might be dedicated to, what it was like to give that up, and a reflection on how quickly that type of thing comes to, become a regular part of your everyday life and all of the things that you can do. Remember, we talked about extensions of your abilities, and you chop that off for a day or for part of a day, you chop off the use of your, a particular app or something. How does it then feel, without that? And what do you do to compensate? And there are, if you need more ideas or things to spark your reflection, another thing you might think about is, how. Let's say you give up a particular app or something. What does it impact more? Your professional life as a student or as a part-time student, part-time worker? Or does it impact your social life and your, or does it impact your particular hobbies and passions? So you could think that through. How much do you depend on electronic media as an integral part of your social life versus what you do as a student, and then, because those are all interesting issues as well. Students have students have a quite a unique type of media use pattern. What do you think, as a student, what do you emphasize more in your media use that somebody else of your age who's not studying in college, they wouldn't experience that? As a student, what are some particular things about your media use? We could talk scheduling, we could talk about devices, like what do you use electronic media for as students?
It's just like research.
Hands up. Now we just got two at once. Let's go for Jarrell and then Natalia.
I said like research.
For research, right? Yeah. So accessing. What would you be looking at for research? Like websites or a library website?
Yeah, catalogs, databases, all that kind of stuff.
All right. And so you could use your phone for that, or you could use your laptop. But it's all an internet thing,
exactly.
Sure. And as a student, yeah, most people wouldn't be searching those databases unless they were a student, for sure.
Only time.
Yeah. Natalia?
I just think something like Canvas is just for students, and you can do a lot of things there.
Yes. So like a learning management software, you might not be accessing that unless you were a student, for sure. How about things like television, radio, those types of things? As a student, does that change anything up?
Television or radio?
Yeah, or
I mean, I guess you'd say if you're like in the broadcasting department, like radio would be like at your access if you're like doing like a music show or a talk show for like an hour or something like that. And you're hosting it, so that's how radio would play into your benefit as a student.
That's a good point. Yeah. So it might take you from just a personal interest into a more concentrated, looking at how do they do this? Because I'm training to be a professional or something like that, or audio, listening to music and stuff. It's like, okay, like, yeah, so you get more serious as a student about some things. Good point. Yeah, Ron?
I sometimes use TV and radio for as a reference for essays.
Oh, okay, that's interesting. Can you remember the last time you might have done something like that? Or
that was like 2 years ago. I made this essay about good and evil, something like that, which is really open-ended, and then I ended up using this book that was adapted into a TV show.
Oh, interesting. Okay. I have a TV criticism class over at State, and there are plenty of shows which really kind of deal with good and evil. There was one called Supernatural. I remember the course because I don't usually watch a lot of those shows, but people write and they might look at good versus evil in this show or that. It's true. Television can bring up a lot of kind of philosophical points and give us something to talk about. So I don't know if that's what you meant, but it's true. As a student, you're going to look at that stuff more seriously maybe than you would just for entertainment's sake. Yeah, cool. And how about marketing to you, other things of the student experience, spring break, those types of things as well. I mean, there's if we think further into like maybe not just the medium, but the content of the medium, as students, you are one of those distinct groups to which marketers, target quite specifically. So a wide range of services, I guess you might say. So you could also think about that. As I said, I invited you. At some point, I know this is a lot for 2 pages. I tend to throw a lot out there and then see if whatever connects with you when you're looking over your data. But so this is another angle. As I said, it's always important to think we're all unique individuals, but we also exist as parts of social groups. Both for marketers and such, we are thought of as parts of demographic groups. Hey, how are you, Thomas?
Hi.
Hi. Can I help you get settled, or?
Yeah, please.
Sure. Where would you like to sit over here? Thanks, Terrell.
Thank you so much.
All right, great. We're just discussing our assignment that we're preparing for February 1st, and here's a handout, and I'll have time after class so we can catch up on all kinds of stuff. Okay, I don't have to run out today, as I often do. Cool. So yeah, just the other thing is think about your unique self, but as part of a social group, a demographic, an age group, a gender group, an interest group. And being a student is part of being a group. You're marketed to in a particular fashion. So you could think about that too. How does giving up my laptop for a few hours impact, something like, as a student, I couldn't do anything, couldn't do that paper, and so whatever. So, questions about this? Some more ideas? Yeah, Jerome.
Do we have to write the question, or do you have to answer the question in question form?
Right. Well, this is a 2-page essay, and there's an example lower down here. Now, you said you did get access to Canvas, right?
Yeah, okay. So
unfortunately, when there's no way I can actually display this exactly the way you look at it, but the assignment is it describes what to do, and then it poses some questions. So there's a number of questions there, short questions. And then there's an example here, just of what another student wrote, a couple of, in 2014 when we did this, but just an example of what it would seem like. So that probably give you an idea. So, to answer directly your question, it says, what was your experience of living without a particular medium? You wouldn't have to take that up exactly, but let's say, partway down your essay, when you get to that sort of reflection, you might write, I decided to give up, Instagram on my phone for a day because it's something that I use a lot. I use it to keep in touch with my friends. And then, my experience of living without Instagram for that day was, etc. I felt cut off from my friends, or I felt bored and I turned to another social network in order to find out stuff, or whatever it was that when you actually did the assignment you experienced. That's what your answer would be in that area. And that would, I'm describing maybe a paragraph or a long paragraph out of one that also deals with some of these other things. And sometimes there are questions here that will not connect with you, like number 2, how do your media choices relate to your interests and personal identity? So, it may be, I'm a college athlete and I consume a lot of, sports as a spectator too, because that's part of who I am. I love sports, I live sports, and so then that would be relevant to write a paragraph about that. But if it, doesn't connect, then you don't write about it. That could equally be, I'm a metalhead, I go out to a lot of clubs, I, stream tons of music and stuff, and it's important to me, it's not only the way I dress, the friends I choose, the hours I keep and stuff, then that's a very important thing for your personal identity. But again, maybe not, and then you don't have to answer it if you can move on to something else. So, like I said, there's a bunch of options, and then you write further into what connects with you. I mean, I think one thing that is kind of a waste of time is saying, I looked over all the questions and it really didn't connect with me. Ultimately, I just get the cheapest media possible and that's it, or something like that. If it's all kind of like, I don't care, it doesn't impact me, it's not important to me, then the whole thing is kind of just like a waste of time. It's a waste of time doing it. So I hope you won't feel that way as you do it. But if you do, fake it and dig further in and see, is even in that, basic indifference towards electronic media, if it ever existed, are there levels of it? Are there stuff you find more tolerable or more interesting? Okay? So make some effort into making this interesting, because it's a piece of writing. No one would ever do any of this if it was all just like, no news here, right? Well, make some news. That's what I'm saying. All right. Cool. Okay. Feel free to just throw up a hand with a question or anything if it occurs to you. Any more people? Great. Miko's in chat. So just if anyone's watching this streaming, remember you have the option to take the class streaming. Please do post something in chat just so we know you're here. Helps me understand who's active in the class and who's not. It's a bit of a It's a bit of a detective story sometime. On February 5th, I have to drop the people who haven't done anything in the class. So how do you do that when not everyone's here? I mean, I look at attendance, I look at who posts in chat. Canvas will show me if you've logged into Canvas and done anything, which is great. And then we will already have given in an assignment on February 1st prior to February 5th. So those are the things that I look for when I'm going through my role and saying, this person's clearly gone and got a job somewhere else and they're not doing anything, so they're out. So I have to do that by law by February 5th because as a college we're not allowed to have people on the list who they didn't come, they didn't even know, and we're charging for them. No, that's not good. So we have to see that you're actively involved, just to keep you on the roll. That's our angle on it. Personally, I hope you all are interested in the class and coming and participating. So, should say that. Righto. So now, slideshow. We were talking this week, chapter 1 of the textbook, which remember you can get it in the library. There's several copies on reserve. You can rent it. There's electronic versions you can rent as well. I think you're good with the PowerPoints up until we have to write essays. Not the little one we're writing now, but the 2 research essays. You'll need to use the textbook then to get information. So this chapter 1 has been a kind of a broad overview of electronic media. We, just from the dawn of time, or at least from the dawn of history, which would be, the beginning of writing. We did a real quick history right up until the emergence of the electronic media. And we talked a little bit about some of the, yes, pigeons. Pigeons were a part of the media at one point. No more. But, thinking about the telegraph, thinking about the newspaper, which is the first of those mass media, right? By mass, we mean that one newspaper publisher could publish a newspaper that would go out to hundreds of thousands, even millions of people. So that would be the mass, are all of those people, 2 S's in mass. All of those people are mass, and we call them mass media because a very few producers distribute their material out to a massive audience. So that was old electronic media, radio, television. But the original one was the newspaper. You could print up a pile of newspapers and send them out that way. And that's what we call a one-to-many model. One publisher, many people, receiving, right? And we talked also about the other option, which was the one-to-one model, which was sort of like email or the telegraph, for instance, where you would send a message to your friends. So there's the one-to-one model, where you go into a little office and send one out. When radio appeared, which was one of the first, electronic mass medium, newspapers were the first mass medium, but put electricity into it and you got the radio. But in the early days of radio, they didn't realize it would be a mass medium. They thought, well, now you can send each other telegraph messages, but you don't need a wire. You can just radio messages to each other. But as they got used to what radio could do, they realized, wow, we can do one message and spread it all over the place. So this is what mass media, newspapers, radio, television, it looked like. But then along came the internet, paradigm breaker, as it says. So the paradigm would have been this one-to-many model. And the internet, of course, with its scalability and interactivity, gives us kind of a different shape. So this would be another way of modeling the old mass media, which would be a sender, a medium, like radio or television, and a receiver. So, this would be your TV station, this would be your audience, and the medium TV. And then we talked about, what was this? The ability of the receiver to feedback, right? Thank you, Andrea. I believe you came up with that answer the first time I asked last class. Feedback, the importance of being able to, write a letter to the editor, or some feedback to the creator of the message. And the Nielsen ratings are a very technical form of feedback as well, in the sense that if no one's watching your television show, Nielsen information about the audience will get back to the network, and the network will cancel that show or something. So there were various forms of feedback there in that system. But when we get to the paradigm-breaking aspect of the internet, we get to a model like this, where you can have numerous one-to-one communications and one-to-many communications. So I think the example I came up with off the top of my head last was YouTube. Where you might start out on YouTube just putting up family videos or something and making sure that your grandparents saw them or something like that, and then all of a sudden you post something else which gets a significant interest, a number of clicks, and within overnight you might have 100,000 views of something you put up. So you might have just had basically a one-to-one model to start with, but the platform makes it possible for one-to-many to happen instantaneously, at which point other people are sharing it, commenting on it, putting it out there. This is how things go viral. But at that point, they are also transmitting your message in that huge interconnected network. So the internet, that's why they call it a paradigm breaker, because it does that different. Yeah, I think that brought us to where we were last class. Anybody, was there anything interesting we talked about that I just didn't summarize there or something like that? I know eventually we got into a pretty interesting discussion about, the continuing relevance of the mass media, given that internet model is so interesting and flexible and, clearly something new and amazing. But, so we had various opinions about the mass media and how they were going to work for us. Right, so we're on to some new slides, but maybe just before I do that, I got to take roll. Sorry. What do you guys know about the legality of content in the electronic media? When can you get in trouble for something you put on the electronic media?
Well, you cannot just be taking pictures or something from Google without making sure that is something you can take.
Okay, right.
And
so there's
post it, like, I don't know, in a website or in.
Yes, got you. So there's copyright issues that are particularly important for those. Yeah, Andrea, sorry.
Same thing, like if you take a picture or video of someone who didn't get their permission, like someone's children or something like that.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. That's true. You can take a picture of a public figure because their right to privacy is compromised by the fact that they are a public figure. So you can snap a picture of a celebrity and not be, subject to being sued for invasion of privacy, but because they're celebrities. But you can't do that to individuals. That's right. How about other content? There's been it's been a while, I guess, since we had any, big things happening on TV. But anybody remember any of those? It's been a while. How can you get in trouble on TV for nothing? Come on. Yes, Mitchell?
Inappropriate content like pornography and stuff.
Ooh, yeah, pornography.
And also like one of those things where viewer discretion is advised. Detailed body parts, stuff like that.
Right. Yeah. So those are the kind of disclaimers that the networks put out there. Yeah. Right. Natalia?
So like the language you're like using, right? You cannot like start like, I don't know, talking like not properly,
We're into offensive languages again too. Yeah.
Especially it depends on the time of the day, right?
Yeah. Well, that's true as well.
Whatever can listen to.
Yes.
Watch you.
Yeah. Exactly. I was just going to specify that after I got a few more ideas out there, but no.
Probably when you are talking about like secret things.
Oh, like state secrets?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm wondering.
Yeah, certainly if you're like a government agent or something like that who puts out those secrets, yeah. I don't, I'm not aware of those laws because I think they're not laws that just stop at the electronic media. I think there's, I don't, like which laws will people who leak top secrets, what will they be, prosecuted under? Because I know, for instance, the administration is like looking for leakers all the time, right? And not just Trump, but Obama before him.
This kind of things.
Yeah. So, exactly.
Or I'm thinking about like if you're streaming something and then you are starting saying, things that you shouldn't.
Right.
Just like interrupt probably.
Yeah, they made, yeah.
So this is something that I think is like a big limitation.
Yeah, it's a new issue. I mean, we may have a chance later on in the semester to look at a documentary called Page One, which is about the New York Times. When they shot that documentary, it was just when when WikiLeaks, Wikipedia, that evil encyclopedia. No, but WikiLeaks had dumped a video online of it was in Iraq. It was shot from the cameras in the helicopters from U.S. forces, and you had the audio of them killing a bunch of people in a village square or something like that. And it's very interesting to watch the New York Times look at this because the reporters, go through it and they say it's being edited. There's a problem here. It's not just a perfect document which shows exactly what happened. They cut pieces out, like they cut the beginning out where you see that people entered the square with heavy machine gunnery and stuff like that. So they start the video, they put online, and you just see a bunch of unarmed people like walking around, and the helicopter guys going, okay, engage, shoot now, and then da 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 da. You see lots of people being like killed right there, and it looks like, well, they were just standing around, right? So the Times goes through this and tries to unpack it, and they publish a front page story about all of this and stuff. But so the point being just that it raised all kinds of issues about how a newspaper, which is doing its best to be objective and stuff, manages to deal with this new internet environment where anybody could put that out. Where WikiLeaks just puts that video up there, says, here, take it, that's it. You do what you want with it, right? Versus they compare it to the Pentagon Papers, where one leaker leaked a government report about, how the Army had lied to the U.S., to the people for decades about how they were doing in Vietnam. And that had to be given to the newspapers. The newspapers had to decide whether to publish. Then the government got an injunction against the New York Times. And so then the Washington Post published it, which there's a new movie out by Steven Spielberg called The Post, I think, which details all of that. So, that was old media where, because there was only one source broadcasting out to the masses, if you shut them down, you silenced everyone. Another one opened up eventually to the betterment of the government, but in that new environment, where everything is like multiply interconnected already, all you need to do is dump the video on YouTube and everyone's going to start talking about it, copying it, recirculating it. It's out there. You don't need the mass media for that. So it's a very interesting thing. Are there laws about that? Yes, there are. I don't know exactly what they are. But the Obama administration kept on prosecuting James Risen, who was a journalist at the New York Times, who, you remember Edward Snowden did the huge data dump about the illegal spying program, the NSA spying on everybody, which was completely illegal. They're not supposed to listen to Americans' communications. Well, Snowden came after this journalist, James Risen, who discovered this due to government leakers. And of course, the government came after Risen and said, tell us who leaked this to you. We want to put them in prison. And he said, no, I won't, because as a journalist, I have a constitutional protection. And eventually, he got away with it, but he was targeted personally with lawsuits and stuff like that. He could have gone to jail, and other journalists have gone to jail for protecting their sources. So, it's kind of serious stuff. And there are slides in here which would, in fact, this one, the First Amendment to the Constitution provides for free speech, right? Free flow of information, vital to democracy, the self-righting principle. I could tell you about that in a second. But it also provides for the freedom of the press. The press is allowed to criticize, explicitly the press. But in this day and age, we could interpret the press, and it is interpreted as meaning the electronic media as well. So they are protected under that First Amendment to be able to criticize the government. The self-righting principle means that it is assumed that if we allow freedom of expression, lies, distortions, inaccuracies will eventually get corrected. They will be, it will be self-righting in the sense that the truth will come out and we will correct those distortions and stuff. So the idea is that you don't have a government censor who sits up there and says, this is fake news, that should be gone. You have a supposedly open marketplace of ideas, and eventually we'll find out what the whole Russia thing was all about, probably. I'm not sure. Yeah?
I'm wondering, we have a law in Italy, it's called par condicio. It means that every time you are talking about politics, you have to allow the same amount of time for the parties involved in the... I'm wondering if here there is the same...
We used to have it. We used to have it, and it's no more. In the 1980s, broadcasters were released from having to do that. It was called the Fairness Doctrine. And what the application was, if you gave time on the air to one political point of view, you had to give the same amount of time to the other political point
Why
of
did
view.
they?
The logic, well, the explanation was that we've got so many different media channels now that it's not as important as when we had only 3 networks, right? We used to have just 3 networks reaching 200 million people. So if one of those networks was allowed to become a conservative mouthpiece, 100 million people would just get that point of view. So in that period, they said we must have a fair exposure of all ideas. But when they got to cable TV with hundreds of channels, and now with the internet with literally limitless channels, now they say, you can get that information somewhere else, and that gives rise to Rush Limbaugh, to Fox News, right, to partisan media now, at least in broadcasting. Now, the history in newspapers goes back, newspapers were incredibly partisan, before the First World War and stuff. They would, you had a Democrat newspaper that would say no good about any Republican. So it was equally partisan back in those days. But on electronic media, there used to be the fairness doctrine, which 1980 it went out the window. So
It's curious because in Italy got like backward. Because before, since the parties were like financing the state, the public television, they could not, apply this thing.
I see.
But then, because of Berlusconi and the private television, and then they said like, oh no, that is not correct.
So it was really a
space for both of the thing, and
They
either
were-
way you
very interesting. Yeah.
vote for, but you should like be able in a conversation to see both of the
Gotcha.
points.
Berlusconi was the prime minister, or what was he, president or prime minister, or
Yeah.
what was the position that he had exactly? It's a parliamentary system, right? And was he prime minister?
It was like
The boss.
yeah.
So in Italy, the boss was a media magnate. It's as though Rupert Murdoch, head of Fox News, became the president of the United States. So what you're saying is they put in this rule where you had to actually have both sides of you,
I
otherwise
don't
it all.
remember if it was under the Berlusconi
Okay, may have been
administration or before. I don't remember. I think it was after. Right
But it didn't go way back.
Berlusconi, but
Okay.
it,
All right, we'll have to leave it there. I got so many slides. We got to move on, okay? But so First Amendment is pertinent to electronic media and does determine in some ways what kind of content that we can see, especially in terms of the tension between the right to free speech and other limitations. So the right to free speech comes into play every time, for instance, the FCC tries to sanction a broadcaster, for instance, for the wardrobe malfunction. Anybody remember that? The wardrobe malfunction? Super Bowl. Halftime, Justin Timberlake and Janet Jackson, right? He rips her clothes and and so there was a huge fine associated with that, right? F-bomb. Someone lets an F-bomb go on television or radio. You'll pay a big fine for that. So this is part of the limitations on electronic media. There are different protections for broadcasting. So here's how it goes, and we'll look at this in more detail later on. But over the air, when you have over-the-air radio or television, the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, has the right to impose fines for things like showing a boob or saying the F word. So offensive content within a certain time period can get you fined, or you could even lose your broadcast license. But that's in broadcasting. Cable TV is not under the same limitations. So you can get away with, a Game of Thrones orgy where there's all kinds of nudity or, series with all kinds of offensive language in it, because cable is not treated the same way as broadcast media is by the government and the internet either. So content limitations exist only for broadcasting under the principle that the radio waves, on which television also works, are a scarce resource. And for that reason, the government has the right on behalf of the American people to curtail the freedom of speech that every citizen and, in fact, now corporation is supposed to have, because it's a scarce, thing, bandwidth. They're allowed to say, no, you can't do this type of thing. You can't be offensive. You can't put pornography up there. You'll be in trouble. Okay, so these are how some of the rules that impact our. Thomas, I'm afraid you're going to fall down on the ground. Would you mind moving further in here? Okay, that's good. I don't want to see you like fall down and hurt yourself.
I'm okay with that.
All right, good, yeah. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
All right, excellent. Okay, now for something completely different. The way media theorists have thought about how to classify what electronic media do for us. They break it down into different types of effects, what they call cognitive effects, cognition, thinking. So electronic media helps us think about stuff. We can learn about things. Emotional effects makes us feel stuff, right? An exciting football game makes it exhilarating. A football game in itself could have cognitive effects. We hear the statistics, we learn about a player's record or something. We're thinking about it. But an amazing play that has us jumping out of our seats, screaming with joy, emotional effect, right? Behavioral effect. The beer commercial that comes on makes us go to the fridge and take something out and have a drink. Behavioral effect. Right? These are all pretty clear. And then influences on how we live our lives, more subtle, diffuse influences, information about fashion. At the end of the course, when we look in more depth at this type of research, there's something called the mean world syndrome, where they've pretty much proven that the more you watch TV, the more you're afraid of being mugged or some kind of violent thing happening to you in real life. Simply because you see on TV so often violent acts, usually perpetrated by certain groups of people. So not only do you think the world is a mean place, but you think that these people are the mean people, and so on and so forth. And the more you watch TV, the more that the worldview kind of correlates. And so in a more subtle way, TV has lots, or mass media, electronic media have influences on how we live our lives. And as you can see, there could be many, many of those. And so part of your media diary is designed to just look, what's the influence of the media on my life? Yeah?
In this example with the football game, to be, for example, like yelling and being aggressive, this is like emotional or behavior?
Oh, I say it's emotional. Simply, I'm just trying to say that you're expressing there the joy of people, scoring a touchdown or something like that.
Okay.
Yeah. Behavioral, I tend to think more in terms of, eliciting a particular behavior. Now, it could be going to get a beer because an advertisement makes it look cool, but it could also be, paying another $2 in order to get more time in your game on your phone in order to get up to the next level or something like that. These are effects where you just feel a compulsion to do something, Versus to me, if they score a touchdown, you could just sit there, you're okay. But, if you jump up, then there's a kind of an influence that leads to action, which in electronic media is, because it's so much oriented towards selling, it's important. Dylan, yeah.
What's the example for cognitive effects?
Would be if you hear the player's stats, for instance, or something like that. So you're thinking, a baseball game when they come up and he's been batting at 235 and stuff. So you're already thinking, okay, how's this going to go? He's facing a right-hander and so on and so on. Yeah, but obviously, if you're watching a nature documentary, it's like pure cognition, unless although I did. Where did I see? Oh, it was like interviewing a couple of parents who they just had kids, and they were talking about watching nature shows and tearing up whenever there was like a little, baby raccoon or something. It was like, so there's also emotional effects in those things too. So it's crazy, no? Influences, so radio, television, all that kind of stuff. The other thing is these things used to run on a schedule, and they would train you into a schedule, 8 o'clock, prime time, sit down, watch TV, So that's another, way that they influence our lives, to live by a particular schedule. But now that we're getting into kind of an asynchronous, remember we talked about the difference between synchronous, which is a kind of media where, the minute that it goes out there broadcast, we're consuming it. So like a live TV broadcast, versus asynchronous, where, you go to Netflix and you can get a show that's like 20 years old or something like that. So that's a different type of thing. And the internet being so much on demand now, this obviously breaks that kind of, they called it appointment viewing. 8 o'clock, gotta sit down, watch this show. You can watch it anytime now, right? You don't have to wait. You just go to Hulu and the thing is on, the minute it's broadcast practically. So this is it's another big change in the way that media is being consumed and the way that we are being influenced, and our lives are somehow being shaped a little bit by the media. Time, a big thing. Audiences, one-to-many versus one-to-one. Well, we've talked about that. We know that this still exists. You will still have events where 250 million people tune in. Super Bowl. Let's see the numbers, exactly how many people watch, but it'll be like 250 million probably exposed to the Super Bowl, but that's pretty rare, versus in the 1970s, you could easily get every night of the week 80 million people watching one channel, because there were only 3. I think that's pretty much good enough on that slide. The new media system brings us more interactivity. So we did talk about feedback. That's a form of interaction. We also, if you want to talk technology, you had your zapper. You had your remote control that could help you zap around channels. That was kind of interactive, right? You could avoid the commercials that way. But the extent of interactivity is now much larger. There are shows that are produced on such a tight, I'm talking about television shows produced on such a tight schedule that week by week they can respond to current events or audience preferences, and they can adapt the story as they go along to handle new things. South Park, oddly enough, an animated show, can within a week have a very topical episode if they so desire, because of how much this is integrated now. The feedback is just quicker. Interactivity, there's the growing possibilities of interactive narratives within kind of game platforms too. That's another thing. How about VR? Anybody seen any VR? Yes? Yourself? Is it Jonah? Yeah. What did you, did it have a narrative? Did it have a story, or was it just a...
I was just trying it out.
Yeah?
Just seeing how it was.
Okay.
Personally, I don't think, at least at this point, it's not very developed. So it's very early stages. So
Yeah.
I personally didn't have too much interest in pursuing it, but I had the opportunity to try it, so I tried it out. It's pretty cool.
Interesting. Yeah.
Definitely an experience.
Yeah.
Depending on what you're doing, if you're just viewing something, it's kind of cool. You can look around and stuff. But if you're actually I've tried the PlayStation VR, which is more like a game where you're actually interacting with the environment.
Yeah.
And that is
Yeah, that's where I see the maximum potential of kind of interactive stuff. Yeah. I think it'll be on us sooner than we think. There's already a few projects out. There's one at Sundance. I can't remember the title of it. There was one at Sundance which was a 40-minute long kind of dramatic thing with a narrative, except that it's not like TV where you cut and you have close-ups and stuff, right? You're literally placed in these environments, in these rooms, and stuff goes on, and you're looking at it. And one time through, you can look at one character. Another time, you can look at another character, and you can shift around your point of view and stuff. And sooner or later, there's going to be game mechanics in that as well. Right now it's just like kind of forking narratives. You could choose to go into this part of the story or that part, but sooner or later it's going to get really interactive.
It is already a thing. I mean, I have the glasses, and sometimes I'm, playing this kind of games. You have to do like things, and you can choose. Like, I don't know, you can go that way or that way, and you have to do stuff like taking things.
Yeah.
And scary games as well. It's like, this is really scary. It's like, I need to take this off, right? So I think it's getting amazing. VR. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it'll be marketable sooner than we think. Yeah. And it'll change everything. I mean, it is changing a lot already in gaming, but I think in fictional, whatever you'll call it, I don't know, television, something. It'll be pretty big pretty soon. What else are we looking at here? Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of information here, but it's like too much maybe. Digitization. In the textbook, it says that the biggest revolution since the printing press has been digitization. So that's something to remember, I think. And it I think I spoke last class a little bit about how flexible it makes the distribution when everything is turned into bits. You can, as long as you have some kind of access, some kind of channel into someone's computer or their device, you can send, text, images, video, audio, or any part of that. It really doesn't matter. It's all digital now. So mass media, text, you had a newspaper. Audio, you had the radio. You wanted video, you had the television. Each thing had a specific thing you subscribed to or had to buy and such. But, with digital, everything starts to converge. So there's this, I'm looking for, this. I'll go back to those other slides. But this idea of convergence, that within this media environment, the boundaries between, what was radio, what was television, what was, popular music and stuff, all of those boundaries are coming down as technically everything can be put together in, digital form. And, the companies that do the distribution may still have, they might be still a television network, but they will have, an online streaming service. And, they may be owned by a larger corporation, just one level up, that is also a cable operation and, with a movie studio or a distribution, network. All of these companies are, in a business sense, converging because everything is, coming together and available in the same channels, basically. Deconvergence, especially, you're seeing print, like you're seeing companies with old media, like newspapers and stuff, cut that off because it's almost worthless. And, so spin off those into, smaller companies and protect, the parts of their companies with a new kind of digital cast to it, So I think, you could look at the 20th Century Fox deal with Disney, and it's like, there's a certain amount of selling off the back catalog assets that represent a kind of a deconvergence. Consolidation, what goes on in business, where one business buys another. And we see a tendency towards a few companies owning everything. Disney being the best example. Disney just having so much money, they could buy anything. It's crazy. In terms of digital broadcasting, well, in television, the FCC twisted everybody's arm, said on this date in 2009, everyone will switch to widescreen, high definition TVs. We'll talk about this, and it's not going to happen again. So, 2009. Now, that required a degree of coordination in the broadcast industries that could not be replicated in radio. The reason really being there's about 1,000 TV stations, there's about 10,000 radio stations in the country, And those radio stations don't have the kind of money that a TV station does to change its entire broadcasting operation to go to high definition. So it's interesting. In other countries, European countries, Canada, Australia, England as well, they have a strong central broadcaster, usually. You know, the BBC, a great example. In those countries, something like the BBC could lead the charge to digitization. They could say, you know, 5 years from now, we promise everything will be digital. And the rest of the broadcast industry, maybe they will follow along. But here in the US, we have a very weak public broadcasting system. It's mostly a privately owned system. So the FCC chose not to go to the radio stations and say, okay, you're all going to change to high definition radio. It does exist. We have, you know, for digital radio broadcasting, we have satellite radio. How many people have satellite radio here? Was it an accident because you got it in the car or something, or you sought it out? Really, Jonah? Did you want it in the car?
But it's like the best thing.
I've been paying for it for like 3 years. I like it better than regular radio because I have access to like a bunch of different radio.
Several hundred channels, yeah.
Well, that's also my major, so I'm a broadcasting major, so I like having access to that.
That makes sense. Based on you're a student, you're looking at it more seriously.
Exactly.
Jonah?
Also, like just the no ads factor.
Yeah.
Is, like the biggest.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, no ads. It's the,
Yeah.
it's the best part.
For sure.
Like the normal radio now is
Yeah.
Horrible.
Well, yeah, it's true. I mean, they're, again, in the struggle to survive, they sell more and more ads cheaper and cheaper to try to keep it afloat. Yeah. So, I mean, you know, XM and Sirius were two separate companies, but they had to merge because it turned out people didn't want, you know, the mass of the population wasn't willing to pay a subscription fee to get XM or XM Sirius or whatever. But together, they're a viable service. So they merged in 2008, and there is another digital system in radio called IBOC, in-band on channel. What that means is, you know, KMEL 106.1. Okay, so IBOC, it exists, and in European countries, many other countries, IBOC is used. So what it is you can put a digital signal out on your FM band as well. So, you know, on your 106.1, you can do broadcast analog radio and digital radio. The only problem is nobody has a digital receiver of this type in order to get you. So it costs you a lot of money to set up to broadcast digital, and finally no one's really using it. So whereas, you know, countries like Norway long ago got rid of their analog radio, and they've reallocated those frequencies to cell phones and digital data and stuff, we still have this really inefficient private broadcasting radio system with a pretty lousy quality compared to what you could have digitally. But we just couldn't, you know, make that transition there. So IBOC is the name of that technology. We're not really seeing it. In terms of government regulation that impacts big business, the biggest trend, and again, we're coming back to all of this eventually in more interesting, detailed ways, but in 1996, there was a Telecommunications Act which, following on to an early wave of you know, deregulation in the 80s with the Reagan administration, in 96, the Telecommunications Act did a bunch of things, but it lifted the caps on media ownership. So it allowed, you know, the current situation where, as a TV broadcaster, you can own stations that will reach like 39% of the US population, not more. You can't buy so many stations that you can reach everybody. The idea being that that gives you too much power to influence people.
It's like
You know.
a monopoly.
Pardon me?
It's like a monopoly.
It could be like a monopoly of information. That's right. Yeah, and they raised the caps in radio ownership, and within about 5 years afterwards, Clear Channel ballooned itself up to 1,200 radio stations. You know, so they had more than 10% of all the radio stations in the United States were owned by one sort of conservative company. So this was really influential. They also voted in copyright laws for the internet, stuff like that. We'll see that eventually. How many people are using like a music streaming service like Spotify, Apple Music, or whoa, just about everybody. Yeah. So that's a huge competition to, you know, terrestrial radio as a source for music. Who was saying that, now that you've got Bluetooth in the car, it's pretty much over? Yeah, right. You step into your car and it'll connect to your phone automatically, and you just play your library and stream your stuff. Yeah, so true. But forever and ever, radio has survived because it's like in every car that you buy, there's a radio. And so, that's been how it survived for a long time. But it seems like that is, that's under fire, and radio is transforming itself. Talk radio, news radio, sports talk, all forms of talk are still pretty profitable. But as you can see, music is, they fired all the DJs and they're putting everything on computers, and it's just like listening to somebody else's, music service on shuffle or something. That's a big deal. TV, the point here is that very often when a new medium comes out, part of their business, a big part of their business, is just redistributing the old media. So, I'm thinking of Hulu, for instance, in streaming services, which just seems to be like every broadcast television show that ever existed is on Hulu. They just made a huge deal for all of the ER episodes. I don't know, does anyone want to watch that? But it's there, right? Yeah?
You remember the last class I was talking about, I'm concerned about the radio because I think can be, kind of like changed. It's because in Spain, all these like radio like shows about, imagine, okay, let's talk about food, or let's talk about like cinema. Now it's not longer on the radio because it's like, okay, the people is not listening, so let's do the TV show about that. So they're all this like the radio shows are going to the TV to do the same, exactly the same, talking about the same, because it seems like for the people it's like easier to be watching that show and listening, about food or whatever, than be listening just, the radio to, not the music. It's something about just talking about something. Right. And this is
how old are those audiences that are watching it on TV? Are they young or are they?
It depends. Some shows are more for like younger people because, I don't know. It's just about imagine. Okay, let's talk about cinema, the movies. You can go now to the movies and watch this and opinion and some people going to the radio show to talk about that.
There are various forms of talk shows,
and
basically.
We were like, I remember I was on the radio and we were talking about, hey, what's going on, because we don't have like that much like people like listening to this now. And okay, let's try the TV show about that. And then it was like, okay, this is working, but not the radio show.
Interesting.
That this is happening, I don't know, in the rest of Europe or here, but in Spain this is happening a lot right now.
That's very interesting. I mean, historically, when TV started up in North America, they took all the best ideas and the stars from radio. It's like they just rated it completely. So it's kind of like history repeats itself. But the other thing is the broadcast TV audience is just getting older and older and older here. Like I think the average age of the CBS viewer is like 55 years old or something like that, which explains why they like all of those crime procedurals and stuff like that, CSI or whatever. There's others, I forget the name, But they've been running for like almost 20 years, and the audience for that is like seriously people who are 50, 60 years old or so. And it seems that those people who still tune in this country, those who tune into broadcast TV are just older and older. And everybody else is moving towards streaming services, on demand, and it's pretty interesting, all that's happening. We've got streaming services like Hulu that basically recycle that whole library of network content. You got your YouTube where, the wall between producers and audience is like kind of collapsing, and in very exciting ways. People can start their own shows, and then, and so yes, and then you've got Netflix with its, sort of its originals, and so there's so much activity there. Amazon, lots of new production studios doing, Amazon in its way, Amazon Studios, they'll do pilots and have people vote on them, and try to get them interested. So far, I don't think all their shows have been the greatest, but things could change. Did you have your hand up, Dylan?
Yeah, you said YouTube, and yeah, I noticed. I don't know. I haven't looked into it, but I know I've heard of YouTube Red. Is that like a live broadcasting system through YouTube?
Well, there is YouTube. I don't know if they call it live, but YouTube Red is basically
like movies.
YouTube Red is they produce content and they'll skim from the most popular. Creators who are on regular YouTube. Where you get 1 million hits, you'll probably be invited to do a show for YouTube Red.
Okay.
And so they do that, and it also, it's coupled with like reduced or no advertising
What
stuff.
would be the live broadcast that I've heard that they're doing now?
I don't know. They also provide the equivalent to cable TV, so you can get what they call a skinny bundle, a reduced number of cable TV channels through there.
Interesting.
And then you as an individual can live stream through YouTube, but they may also have events. Ethan, do you know something about it?
Yeah, wasn't like the YouTube, like the original content, I remember hearing something where it was like a failure because it's like, well, you're already putting up stuff for free, so if you have that creator putting up a paid content, it's like, why would I pay for it? You put up stuff for free, I don't want it.
Interesting, yeah. I don't know how that worked out for them.
Yeah, because I think someone I listened to a podcast for was doing a show for them, and it was like, yeah, I'm not going to pay to see that.
Yeah.
If you're free stuff already, so what's the point?
Interesting. Yeah. I'd like to get more into it and know how successful those things are. But if you look at how radio flopped when they tried to, sell subscriptions to that, it seems to be the same thing. Like, why would the consumer pay money for what they could get for free?
Exactly. Then again, you have those individuals like myself who do pay for radio subscriptions.
Yep. Yeah, and the other thing is, just the sheer convenience of being done with, ads or whatever else that can coerce people into doing it. Well, at the end of these Thursday classes, we do something called Kahoot, which probably I haven't left quite enough time for this, but basically what this is, oh my God, will I remember even what my the usual problems here. So I won't sell this too hard until I actually get it open, and we'll see. Woohoo, dude! It was sub-password number 4 actually works. So what a Kahoot is, and I tried to do this in my other class and flopped there, but
we didn't.
We didn't manage to make it. But this one, we have a long tradition of successful Kahooting. So we're going to play this one. So what this is if you have a mobile device, you go to kahoot.it and you enter in a PIN number that will appear here very soon, and you can vote online as we. I ask you 10 questions, multiple choice questions, which this is probably too irritating, that music. So go to kahoot.it and enter 679-599. Natalia's there. You're free also to use, oh, there we go. That's whatever else you'd like to try as a username. Please, FCC legal. And we'll be good. All right, so I'll give you another couple of seconds to get in there. Now, if you don't want to play this on your device, you can still follow along in class and find out the answers to these questions. A subset of these questions will be on the exam. So this is my way of, sort of saying, well, these were the important things that we learned that I hope you'll take away, and on the exam, you'll find these types of questions, these exact questions sometimes. And what else could I say about it? Well, I don't know. Good enough. Let's start the game, and you can join while we're still going, Jarrell.
All right.
Yeah, because there are 10 questions. We need the time. 9 questions only. Are you ready for? Yes. So this question: whose model of communication is known as the mathematical model? So that was this model: send, medium, receive. You remember who that was?
6, 7, 9.
All right, it's coming down. 3, 2, 1. Do vote if you can. 4 people got it right. So that was Shannon and Weaver. The mathematical model was send, medium, receive. So that's that model. And you can check these out. We're going to review for these quizzes anyway. But yeah. So it also kind of tracks who's doing what. Which is considered the nation's first mass medium? What was the first mass medium? There it is. 10 people got it. Newspapers. That's right. I said it about 5 times today. Newspapers were considered the first mass media. All right, woo, Andrea's doing well. Convergence, this is why some people take, convergence happens when different types of media become the same or become grouped under the same platform. We talked about digital convergence. So, one more person maybe? Oh, if I get in there, 10 people, that is true, that's right. So when we talk about convergence, we're saying that what used to be radio and television can now be all found converged within one media platform. So, cool, move on to the next. And localism doesn't matter to radio stations anymore. So I didn't get to this. What's your guess? Do you think that, like a Wild 95 or something, does it matter competitively that a radio station has a local identity, plays local music, talks to people in their language locally, versus a Spotify or something which is global?
I'm just about to go, bro.
So, all right, now don't be too disappointed. Remember, this is not for credit. We're just setting up for those big exams and stuff. However, it is false. Okay, so in the battle that radio wages against streaming services, localism does matter. That's one of the few things they have left. If you're XM Sirius, you're not going to talk to people about something that happened in San Francisco yesterday, because you're broadcasting everywhere. All right, next one up. What do you call messages that are received almost instantaneously after transmission? So remember, there were two types. We broke it down to two types. What's meant here is it's like a live broadcast. What do we call that? All right, 10. Wow, that was 10 out of 12. Got it right. Synchronous media. So that refers to media that is consumed almost at the moment that it is distributed, broadcast. Yeah. So. What is probably the most revolutionary innovation since the printing press? 9 people got digitization. So, yep, again, we said it today. Turning things digital is one of the biggest revolutions since that. And question 7, digital let stations offer multiple channels in their frequency. That was called IBOC. Remember? All right, we're going to skip ahead on that. I don't want too many people to get that right. It's true. It's true. Okay. IBOC. IBOC is multiple. You got digital and analog on the same frequency. Which kind of an effect is it when we learn something from the mass media? There we go. Woo! Not bad. 11 people got that right. It is cognitive when we learn something. Yeah. And the last question.
I always think this is true.
What is that? Oh, okay. Which one of these is true? Woohoo! 8. It's all true. All of those are true. Oh, okay. So all of these are true. All right, so I hope you did okay. If you didn't, no worries.
It's incorrect?
It's incorrect?
Oh, okay.
What is this? No, your answer was incorrect. But
Wait, I've done it.
the podium! Congratulations to you all. If any of this was confusing, note it down. We'll talk about it next class, okay? So that's it. We're out on time. Amazing. See you next week.